Welcome back to Most Amazing Top 10. Here are the top 10 real people in history scarier than the devil himself. Yeah, we're getting dark for this one. Let's do it. Kicking off the list at number 10. Ivan the Terrible. If his name didn't already give you a hint here, Ivan the Terrible was not a great lad. He was rather terrible. His Russian nickname translates to more than evil, so I figured who better to kick off this dark list with than this lad. The first Tsar of Russia back in the mid-1500s, okay. He created Russia's secret police. Ivan IV enjoyed harming members of nobility, and he did so in cruel ways. A ray of sunshine appeared in 1564, Ivan the Terrible officially resigned. And then a year later, however, he immediately came back, so yeah. And then he took control of 1/3 of the Muscovite realms. Not a retirement at all, right back up on that ruling evil horse, I guess. And then in 1581, he took out his heir to the throne, literally like a Game of Thrones villain, so yeah, he's evil to all those around him and his own family. Number 9, Caligula. Of course, we have to include Caligula on a list of evil lads. We've got to go back to ancient Rome for this one, returning the clocks back to 12 AD. The Roman Emperor Nero was already making headlines at this point. He was cruel as well, we'll talk about him later on. But then in comes Caligula to change the game in a weird and also cruel way. He loved spending money and showing off. He once had a 2-mile long boat, like a floating bridge, just so he could gallop back and forth on his horse. And then everyone was looking and they're like, oh great, cool horse and cool bridge guy. We're all so hungry. He would also order his troops to do odd things, like go into the sea and collect as many seashells as possible. Like that's something you do if you're 7 years old. You're like, I want all the seashells now. And they're like, you bet. And they collect them. They're like, do we listen for hints? Why are we doing this? He then built a fancy house for his horse in Cydidas. Yeah, not a dog house, not like a shed, like a fancy, rich palace. Why, you ask? Well, because Caligula was on his way to appointing said horse into the high office. Yeah, Caligula was taken out sadly before this officially was completed, but he was very close to having his horse in the office of consul. Imagine losing your job to this guy's horse. Imagine the things he would have done. He was en route to do some bad stuff. What a weirdo. Number 8, Queen Ranavalona. The last queen of Madagascar, Queen Ranavalona. One of the worst historically. She had quite the temper, it seemed. She was born in 1788 and she ruled over the kingdom for 33 years in total. She's remembered as cruel, violent, and would often choose, violence first in order to preserve independence over the island. She's known as the most ruthless queen in history. After the death of her husband, she went mad with power almost instantly. In the late 1700s, King Adrian originally brought peace to the lands, but naturally there were traditionalists who opposed him. That's not new, we've seen every medieval show. There's people who aren't on board. The king's uncle at one point tried to take him out, but a local warned the king beforehand. And that king repaid said local by adopting his daughter, Ranavalona, and now she had to marry his son, Prince Radama. Now when said prince was alive, they didn't even get along. And come 1810, the king passed away, giving Ranavalona the promotion of a lifetime. But rumor has it, of course, is that Ranavalona poisoned the king. Just a rumor, but it is fitting as to what comes next. Ranavalona kept away the advances of the French and the British by leaving bodies of those who tried to attack prior out on display. Yeah, just sitting there on the beach. Like some Queen Cersei type stuff. I don't know. I've been watching a lot of Game of Thrones recently, a lot of evil people. In 1845, Queen Ranavalona ordered 50,000 subjects to build roads across the jungle for 4 months, this massive buffalo hunt, and well, 10,000 of those poor souls died of starvation during this and of course exhaustion. And not one buffalo was even hunted. Just poor leadership and deaths, a lot of deaths. Number 7, Jolly Jane Toppan. Okay, getting a little more recent for this one. In the 1880s, Jane Toppan, aka Jolly Jane, is now confessing to killing 31 people. And with that nickname and that many victims, yeah, I have to talk about her. Jolly Jane Toppan was a nurse working in Massachusetts. She would take care of the elderly, but instead of TLC, Jane would give them morphine and atropine. And to make things even more horrible, if such thing exists, Jane would lay next to her victim after she poisoned them and just would lie there while they were passing away. Yeah, evil, just evil and twisted, right? Just the worst thing ever. She managed to take the souls of 31 patients, but those numbers potentially reached the hundreds. She eventually and thankfully got caught and spent the remainder of her days lying alone in an asylum. Yeah, these killings began when she was younger after a boyfriend dumped her. That was the start of her mental decline, apparently. Number 6, George Chapman. Going back to the late 1800s again for this guy. He began his career as a Polish doctor, but in 1888, he moved to London, and that's when things got a little dicey. Once he arrived in London, Chapman sought out 4 mistresses. Not 3, not 2, 4. Despite already being married beforehand, which you probably could have predicted, George was a doctor, he was a cheater, and you could have guessed it by the title of this list, he was also a killer. He poisoned all 4 of those mistresses with arsenic. Chapman was also thankfully caught and later was executed for these horrible crimes in 1903. This guy was so bad they actually thought perhaps this was Jack the Ripper, but that's been proven otherwise. Isn't that crazy? Like, oh, we thought you were this horrible person, but you're just your own unique horrible person. Nice. Now there's 2 of you. Horrible. Number 5, Anna Ivanova. Anna Ivanova, the cruel ice princess, aka the Empress of Russia back in 1730 to 1740. Where to begin? Okay, first of all, when you think ice princess, you want to put a magical spin on it, right? Because that's all we know. Well, this was Russia in the 1700s. This was not a magical fun time. Not a Disney princess, that's for sure. To celebrate their victory over the Ottoman Empire, Anna Ivanova gave the order to build an ice palace, to celebrate the marriage of one of her maids and a prince. Sounds joyous almost, magical one would say. Thing is, these guys didn't know each other prior to getting married, so that was weird as is, right? Can't forget that detail. They were complete strangers, but then they were forced to marry each other in a freezing cold palace literally made of ice in the dead of night. They had to ride an elephant as well as a newlywed couple. Poor elephant. And all the guests, they were also forced to dress up like clowns for this entire party. So even if you weren't getting married, you were forced to be humiliated still. All in the name of said ice queen. Yeah, a little different than Frozen, I'd say. A little tiny bit different than Frozen. This Anna is not great. Number 4, Nero. Yeah, we gotta mention Nero. If we're gonna talk smack about Caligula and his high horse, literally, we gotta include Nero. This was ancient Rome back in 68 CE. Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. He burned down Rome. That's pretty bad. That's memorable, I'd say. Dare I say, even more memorable than a horse palace. It's a messed up family, okay. Nero was heir of the Emperor Claudius, the 5th Roman emperor. He wiped out his entire family in horrible, different, unique ways, dare I say. And historically, it's believed that Nero lit the fire that burned down Rome. But he made it look like the Christians did it. Once all was lost in the empire, Nero took his own life. Yeah, just all bad. Just bad leadership, bad Caligula and his horse, Nero, everything's burning. Rome was not pleasant, not a pleasant time. They had aqueducts and horrible history. Number 3, H.H. Holmes. His fascination with medicine began at a young age. He used to perform fictional surgeries on his stuffed animals, always a red flag, awesome. H.H. went on to medical school, and shortly after finishing, he began killing people in order to steal their property. He then built himself this massive, terrifying custom house that he had to build to include things like secret passages, trapdoors, soundproof rooms, doors that locked from the outside with like gas jets on the inside. He even had a kiln to cremate his bodies. Is he the devil? I would say worse than the devil. I'd rather make a deal with the devil than meet H.H. Holmes any day, literally. Holmes gets close with women in order to take control of their finances and then later kill them, but he would also require his employees to fill out life insurance policies that named him as the beneficiary. Some of the bodies he even ended up selling to medical schools. How gross is that? Eventually, he was found out, nice, he was caught, and then sentenced, of course, to death. Not nearly enough times. It isn't exactly known how many victims he had, but it's thought to be somewhere over 200. Number 2, Elizabeth Bathory. The Hungarian noblewoman was everything but. Yeah, back in the late 16th century and even in the early 17th century, Elizabeth would meet young peasants and ask them to come work at her castle, right? This is a good day for peasants. She promised them a high-paying job as a servant. That's a way better deal than being broke outside of the castle, so many times, if not all the time, these poor folk would come back with her. When they arrived to the castle, that's when things would change. That's when the tone would kind of shift. She would then brutally harm them. She would trap them, torture them, really just all the worst of the worst. And then finally, once she was bored or ready for the next house guest to arrive, she would finish them off. The number of fatalities here is somewhere around 80 peasants, but historically that number has also gone up to 600 in some accounts. So 80 to 600. Okay, come 1611, things changed. She was locked up in her own castle with barely any sunlight. Nice. She was feeling the weight of her actions. Hopefully, she was learning a few lessons here, but 4 years later in 1614, she passed away. Yet next to Vlad the Impaler, she's been a large inspiration behind Bram Stoker's Dracula. Yeah, that's bad. That's really bad. Number 1, Mao Zedong. Okay, getting into some pretty high numbers here. The dictator of China from 1943 to 1976. Mao Zedong. He had this vision one day that China would be the superpower, the super country, and in order to do so, he tried to reshape China's economy and turn it into an industrial one. From 1958 to 1962, the Great Leap Forward policy ended up leading to the deaths of around 45 million people. This makes the Great Chinese Famine the largest in human history. Again, this is also an estimate. The deaths were somewhere around 30 to 60 million. That feels like a number 1 to me. I don't know. I'd say that's a number 1. Can't really rate evil and bad, but definitely can't put that at number 8, can we? Those are the top 10 real people in history scarier than the devil. Obviously, there's so much more, people I didn't talk about. How do you even rank something like this? I'm doing my best. But if you want a part 2, I'll continue to do so. Let's do it. I've been Taylor McWatters, and we'll see you next time. And then in 1581, he took out his heir to the throne. Hair, I would say hair. I was gonna burp, but I was like, maybe I'll throw up. This one's horrible. How much time do I have left? So I'm like, wee.